Hey guys, this is Professor Vitt. Welcome to our lecture on Chapter 8, Memory Errors. I'm just going to give you a little rundown here before we start. We're going to talk about some memory myths first. Then we will discuss various types of memory, although we're only going to really reference those parts in the book that discuss those. And you can review them for purposes of the exam on your own. Then we're going to do a slight exercise involving priming, and I'll demonstrate to you how your memory and your recall can be affected by essentially some stimulus that you receive ahead of time. And then lastly, we'll talk about some forms of memory errors. Big picture for this chapter, hopefully you will realize the extent to which your memory is pretty unreliable. That's the goal, because remember, in the grand scheme of things, we're looking at memory as an alternative explanation, or memory error as an alternative explanation if we encounter something that resists our understanding and is something that is thought to be paranormal or supernatural. So these are natural explanations for things that we think may be supernatural. Okay. First memory myth. There's this idea that our memory is unlimited, that we're simply perfect recording machines that are capable of capturing every detail. We're just not able to recall it. That is not correct, actually. It doesn't reflect how memory works. There's another myth that we only use 10% of our brain or 10% of our memories. That's not correct. We use all of our brain throughout the day, and in a way we have to, because it's a really small organ given the rest of our body. So if it's in there, it's probably being used. There aren't a lot of necessarily redundant systems in the brain, although there are some. And then another memory myth is that memory is incredibly accurate, like a video recording. That's not true. Our confidence in some of our memories is very high, but that confidence doesn't reflect the accuracy of those memories. The book discusses this a little bit to try. He does a hypothetical to demonstrate the difference between observer memory and field memory. And essentially, Dr. Smith's point is just that when you recall an event, you seldom recall that event from your own perspective. Instead, your mind sort of furnishes an entire snapshot, and you're you're sort of off screen somewhere watching yourself. And he makes the point that that is inherently incorrect, and it is a constructed model of what happened, not what actually happened. Okay, so this is the section, remember, I discussed earlier. We talk about what memory is. I'm going to refer you to the book on this, pages 168 to 169, but there's sensory memory, short-term memory, long-term memory, and then there are different types of long-term memory, and then there's working and active memory, and there's a lot of really, really interesting literature concerning how these types of memory interact, what they are, their limitations, and so forth. I leave that to you as an exercise to review on your own. Now we are going to conduct our memory exercise. This is where I'm going to show you the effect of priming. Essentially, I'm going to show you how I can affect your cognitive performance based on information that I give to you ahead of time. So let's give this a shot. The first thing I'd like you to do is to pick a number between 1 and 100. It can't be 0, and it can't be 101. Okay, you have that number in your head. If that number was an odd number, I want you to close your eyes until I tell you. If it's even, just keep them open. Okay, so now you may want to pause your videotape here and just to pause your stream for just a second here. Here are some words, and I want you to unscramble them. So unscramble each one of these words. So I've done the first one here for you. All right, so SHID is actually dish. So go ahead and try to work these out. I would pause them. There's no time restriction here. Just work through the list and actually do it. In order for this to work, you'll need to do this. Okay, these are the answers. You have napkin, saucer. Okay, and I don't want to say too much because there are people who have their eyes closed. Okay, now, If you had your eyes open because you were an even number, close your eyes now. And if you had an odd number, go ahead and open those eyes now. Okay, now here are some words, and I want you to unscramble these. So I've done the first one for you. Right, you can see this, and I would pause the tape now so that you can do each one of these at your own pace. Okay, now these are the answers. I want you to review your answers to what you have. You can hit pause if you want. Great, okay, part 3, we're almost there. Everyone has your eyes open. Don't say anything at all. Doesn't really matter. No one could hear you unless you're taking the course with somebody online and you're both reviewing the same video in the same room. But I want you to unscramble this word. Okay, open your eyes. Some of you will have the word pedal. Some of you will have the word plate. Here's the weird thing. If you're in the first group and you were primed with dinnerware, you're going to unscramble the word plate. But if you were primed with flower words, you're going to see the word pedal. So what this demonstrates, well, you're more likely to anyway. What this demonstrates is that what you are initially exposed to can unconsciously influence what you see later. And so we talked about this earlier, how expectations can affect perception. What's the big deal? Well, some people get very concerned with priming somebody when you're talking to them. So if you're an investigator, you have to be very careful of this. The questions that you ask, regardless of the type of investigation, can really impact the type of answers you get. So when people are trying to draft questionnaires that involve an extraordinary claim or an anomalous phenomenon, they try to take great care in order to not taint or destroy or corrupt the memories that a person has. A fun example here would be, this is Jimmy Carter's questionnaire from a famous sighting he had of a UFO. And based on some of these questions, you'll have various skeptics objecting that these questions, by their very nature, are going to corrupt someone's recall. Of course, to be fair, you're going to have to ask some leading questions, so you're sort of stuck here, right? You're going to have an argument either way, but it's just an important note. Now we're going to talk just a second about the reliability of memory and false memories. One of the most fun memory errors that occurs is called cryptomnesia, and its technical term is source monitoring error. What it means is you can have a memory that you think is your own, but it's actually co-opted from another source. The book has a great example of this. There's an interview with Ronald Reagan, and he discusses a story regarding some type of some type of pilot in World War II and so forth. And it's a very heroic moment when this pilot and I think a co-pilot are going to go down together. And he says, no, we're going to go down together. Well, it turns out that was actually an incredibly popular movie. And that was the source of Reagan's memory, was a movie, but he in fact thought it was real. That sort of stuff happens all the time. In fact, you can take someone else's memory or a story told to you and you can co-opt that as your own and you'll never know. I know that sounds insane, but it actually happens more than you'd think. And there are other problems with our memories. One of them is called the misinformation effect, or pseudo-memories. You can plant false memories in someone by by essentially giving them or presenting them with information that is incorrect. So a very, very famous study by Elizabeth Loftus is one where she successfully convinced people, and I believe this is Loftus, it might have been a team of researchers, so I may be incorrect there. Smith will have the right site. And if you need it, let me know. I'm happy to send it to you. But they actually took a group of people and they successfully convinced them that they were lost in a mall as a child. and that they were rescued by an elderly relative or something like that. The event never occurred, but what they essentially did was create a collage of the event, and they had loved ones corroborate this, even though it was false and they knew it. And this has been done repeatedly. So different researchers have implanted different false memories. Now, they tell the subjects afterwards that this was a false memory. We implanted this in you. So there were some ethical considerations initially with this type of research, but the benefit of knowing this effect to science was ultimately determined on ethical grounds far outweighed the minor inconvenience to someone who has a false memory implanted. But there have been all kinds of false memory implants done in clinical settings. For instance, that someone nearly drowned or they were attacked by a vicious animal. These types of false memories are very easy to implant. Now, why does this matter? Well, people have false memories all the time, and the problem with a false memory is that you don't necessarily know it's false. And if you've ever spoken to someone who claims to have been abducted, this experience, these memories are incredibly vivid and profoundly traumatic to people. And it's difficult to explain or to try and show someone that an alien abduction could be a false memory implant because it's so absurd to them. I've had speakers come to my physical class when I teach this class physically, and I'm happy to say these are absolutely first-rate smart people. They have these memories, and they will tell you, look, this memory is just as clear to me as when I walked in this door. So although in a clinical setting maybe someone can generate a false memory, it's just extremely difficult for me to believe that this memory is false. And so you'll have people who have these incredible memories, as you can see here, of being abducted by aliens, and they have just amazing amounts of detail to these stories. And you can just Google alien abduction, and you can see here there are alien abduction meetups. Because these are very common memories that people have. So remember, there's always going to be a tension there. There's going to be someone who says this is a false memory, here's an explanation for it, and then you'll have the party who has this memory, and they say, well, no, this couldn't possibly be a false memory. It's far too vivid. But what I want you to take away from this, regardless of which side you land on there, is the idea that memory is not a static process. It's not a camera that takes a picture. It's a process that changes over time, and details change over time, and they morph over time depending upon what new stimulus you have and what prior stimulus you've been exposed to. A famous example, the book talks about Hillary Clinton, but probably more recently, the most famous example we've got is President Bush talking about the 9/11 attacks. So December the 4th of 2001, he talks to people about how he heard about these attacks. And so he says here, I was in Florida, my chief of staff, Andy Card, I was in a classroom talking about and reading a program, and I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw an airplane hit the tower, the TV was on, and I used to fly, and so I said, that must be one terrible pilot. It must have been a horrible accident, but I was whisked off. I didn't have much time to think about it, and I was sitting in the classroom, and Andy Card, my chief, who was sitting over here, walked in and said, second plane has hit the tower. America's under attack. All right, now, December the 20th, he gives an interview with the Washington Post, so this is not a couple of weeks later, and he tells the following story. Senior advisor Carl Rowe brings him the news saying it appeared to be an accident with a small twin-engine plane. In fact, it was American Airlines Flight 11, Boeing 767. Based on what he was told, Bush assumed it was an accident. Quote, this is pilot error, the president recalled saying. It's unbelievable that somebody would do this. Conferring with Andrew Card Jr., White House Chief of Staff, Bush says the guy must have had a heart attack at 9:05 a.m., a United Airlines Flight 175, also Boeing 767, smashes into the South Tower of the Trade Center. Bush was seated on a stool in the classroom When Card whispered the news, the second plane has hit the second plane hit the second tower. America is under attack. Now, yet again, January the 5th of 2002, so sometime later, Bush recalls the event. I was sitting there, and my chief of staff, we walked into the classroom. I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on. I thought it was pilot error, and I was amazed anybody could make such a mistake, so on and so forth. And I'm sitting there listening to the briefing, and Andy Card comes in and says, America is under attack. Okay, big summary. What's happening here? The first and third memories, he sees the news on television. The second memory, Karl Rove tells him. The first and third seem impossible because there was no footage of the first plane hitting the tower at that hour of the morning. It just wasn't available yet. So now, why would this possibly happen? Well, conspiracy theorists will say that Bush wants to pollute the stream of information to confuse people and keep them off. Some sort of misinformation campaign. But that, they're fair enough, okay, but there are good reasons to think that's not the case. Most notably, the obvious inconsistencies in the story. Bush knows at this point in his term that anything he says, especially in an interview, is going to be written down in posterity for a great many years. So he's relying on his memory sincerely, and his memory just happens to be completely wrong. Oftentimes events that surround traumatic events like this are called flashbulb memories, and they're not often very good. But when you talk to people who've had these traumatic memories, they will tell you, I remember it very clearly. I remember it was like it was yesterday. But the problem here is your confidence is not a good indicator of your memory. All right. Another problem with memories, familiarity is truth. So the idea here is that if a fact or a non-fact, right, is repeated enough, you are more likely to think that it is true. And so there is this sort of truth by repetition effect that seems to happen. So if you hear something enough, you will start to think that it's true. This is not a cognitive, conscious decision. It's just it's an unconscious one. It's a habit that your mind has. This is demonstrated usually in clinical settings by looking at lists of statements, and then sort of some are true, some are false, and even though you're told some are false earlier, when you're presented with those same statements later, you think that they're true. The book goes into greater detail on this. This could kind of play a role in just a little thing I'm showing here, which is Joe Nichols' Alien Timeline, which is just a little summary of what different aliens have looked like in American culture for the last 50 or 60, maybe 70 years. And the idea here is that as you are presented with images from the media concerning the appearance of extraterrestrials, people who recall these events as memories tend to have memories that coincide with what the predominant media depiction is of aliens. Another false memory, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this memory error, but it's imagination inflation, or saying is believing. And the idea is that when you're asked to fantasize about an event or reenact an event, the likelihood that you will later remember that event as correct, even though you initially knew that it wasn't, is greater. So saying becomes believing. So you can imagine someone who's had something happen to them and they continually repeat that story over and over again, they will eventually come to believe it. On pages 179 to 182, we have the deja vu reality check. I encourage you to review that for purposes of the exam. And that concludes our Chapter 8 lecture. I greatly appreciate your patience in me getting this up It's been an interesting time here the last week with my back. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, rvitt@lbcc.edu.